Hello and welcome to this video orientation for Lent 2021 at Faith Reformed Church. My name is Drew Poppleton, lead pastor at Faith. I wanted to provide this little video orientation so that not only we could prepare those of you who are part of Faith Church to engage in our specific practices for this coming Lent, but also to talk about Lent in a more general way, because I know that some people are not really familiar with Lent. It tends to be associated with the Catholic Church and sort of Catholic tradition. And I just want to say that part of the reason that it's part of Catholic tradition is because, unlike a lot of Protestant churches, the Catholic Church has not unmoored itself from the early church tradition. So when Protestants sort of rejected some Catholicism, one of the negative side effects of that was sort of throwing out the first 1,500 years of the Christian tradition. But there's a ton of good stuff in there, including the traditions around Lent, which go all the way back to the early church. So just like we engage Advent as a way of longing for the second coming, we can engage Lent as a way of preparing ourselves for Christ's passion, his cross, and his resurrection. And so there's just a lot of good stuff around engaging Lent, good stuff for us as what it means to be disciples and to be formed spiritually. So what all does it entail? I think the easiest way to talk about Lent, or one of the best entry points for talking about Lent, is to talk about the fact that it's usually 46 days. 46 days. Not usually, it always is 46 days. So why is it 46 days? It's 46 days because we're emulating the 40 days of Jesus in the wilderness. So after he's baptized and heads out as an adult right prior to his ministry, he heads out to 40 days in the wilderness in order to be tempted by the devil. And he himself is emulating the 40 years in the wilderness that the Israelites experienced. And so the gears should be turning in your head. Well, why is it 46 days? Why is Lent 46 days if we're emulating the 40 days of Jesus? Good question. The reason we do that is because the Sundays in Lent don't count. So why don't they count? Because from the earliest stages of the church, Christians worshiped on Sundays because we were celebrating the resurrection. He died on a Friday, rose on a Sunday. We celebrate on Sundays. That's when we have our worship services. And it's a celebration of the resurrection. And because Lent actually entails a lot of stuff that's not about the resurrection, we sort of take a break from the Lenten activities on Sundays. They're an exception to the rule, so they don't count toward the 40 days. So that's why it's 46 days, because of those 6 Sundays. So let's get back to the 40 days of emulating Jesus. What's that all about? Well, it is about taking on a little bit of his suffering. It's also about humbling ourselves in ways that emulate the way that he humbled himself, and also an acknowledgement that without his help, we're lost. So because it involves so much humbling, because it involves enduring a little bit of his suffering, one of the traditions that you might know around Lent is that people might give something up for Lent. But that's not really what this is about. It's not about giving something up because we have some annoying habit that we just want to take care of, and Lent provides this great excuse for us to finally, stop eating those treats, or stop drinking that Diet Coke, or stop watching that TV show that we know is bad for our soul. All those things could be really good for us to give up, but that's not really what this is about when we endure a little suffering and humble ourselves like he did. It's more about emulating Jesus and carrying our own cross as we anticipate him carrying the cross. It's about us carrying our own cross. And so we also know that the way in which he endured those tests in the wilderness prepared him to endure the tests that he undertook in ministry, and it prepared him to endure the suffering that took place on the cross. And so our observation of Lent is supposed to be about the same sorts of things. It's about self-sacrifice for the sake of God's glory. It's about self-sacrifice for the sake of God's glory. So in that sense, it's not about giving up something that we typically enjoy or indulge in, as a form of like a little bit of self-flagellation. That's not what it's about. That's losing the point of the story if we just give up something like that. It's more about self-sacrifice, which sometimes is about adding something that we typically avoid. So adding something that we typically avoid could also be a way that we engage Lent. But it's definitely not about using Lent to do that diet that I've always been itching to do. It's more about dying to self so that we might live for Christ. It's more about dying to sin so that we might live in the Spirit. It's about this theme of death and resurrection, dying to something and living for something else. That's what the journey is all about, which really points to something that's so vital about discipleship that we don't always get, or just isn't always conveyed to us. That a lot of times we think our spiritual formation path is additive. That means if we just add more things. So if we read our Bible more, pray more, serve more, then we'll be transformed into who God would have us be in this world. And what's true is that the true path of discipleship doesn't just involve addition, that a lot of times it involves subtraction. That there's things that need to be stripped away from us, and then we add Christ. So we die to self, add Christ. We die to these sins, and we live to the Spirit. We have to die to things and live to them. And that's part of what this Lenten journey is about. It's about being mindful of the ways in which we need to die to self and die to sin and live to those other things, in addition to being mindful of our own literal death and resurrection. So, for instance, if you want to maybe give something up for Lent, maybe think about dying to something and living to something else. So, die to judgment and live to grace. So notice the subtraction pattern. If we're really going to take on what it means to extend grace toward other people, we actually have to have that judging part of ourselves die. Or maybe dying to distraction and busyness so that we can be present to somebody else. Because often we know that what it means to love another person is to be truly present to them. But in order to be present to them, something in us needs to die. And it's that distraction and busyness. It's our own obsession with our own self. In the same way you could die to insecurities and live to your secure identity in Christ. In the same way you could die to your own priorities and live for the sake of God's priorities. You could die to selfishness and think more about other people and their own interests, the whole Philippians 2 kind of idea. So if you want to give something up, consider giving up judgment, giving up distraction, giving up insecurity, giving up selfishness, and all those other things. And just recognize that it's not going to be easy. You're going to need the Spirit's help. You're going to need God's help, and you're going to need the help of other people. And what might that look like? We thought about even trying to pair people up or put them in little triads, and so you can have some life-giving accountability about the thing that you're truly trying to give up, because you're not just giving up chocolate or Diet Coke or that TV show. You're really giving up these huge parts of your life, and you want to live into a whole new way of life. And you need the support of the Christian community, and you need the support of God's self. So, but we didn't organize those groups, but don't let it stop you from organizing that kind of group. If you really want to take your discipleship to the next level, I'd encourage you to do that. So all of this leads to our theme for this particular Lent, and our theme is going to be Memento Mori, which translated means remember you will die. Remember you will die, which is nothing more than the traditional approach to Lent. This whole idea of remember your death and then remember Christ's resurrection. But it starts with, before we can really truly comprehend this hope that we have in Jesus, we really have to stare directly in the face of things that are going to die and things that need to die. And so, that's the whole point of our Lent. Remember that you will die. And that's the whole point of Ash Wednesday, that on Ash Wednesday, during the imposition of ashes, the pastor or whoever else might quote Genesis 3:19, that you are dust. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Remember your mortality. Remember your death. Remember you will die. Memento mori. And a proper Ash Wednesday reminds us in no uncertain terms that we are mortal, that we are sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, that the curse that was on them in Genesis 3:19 is the curse that's on us. And yet, as 1 Corinthians 15:49 reminds us, that just as we're born in the image of the man of dust, i.e. Adam, that we will also bear the image of the man of heaven. That because of what Christ has done, we will have a different destiny. than we maybe ought to or should, that his resurrection ensures our victory over death and that we will no longer be swallowed up under death. We won't just return to the dust. We will actually enjoy life with God forever, which is ridiculous. That's what Lent's about, this juxtaposition between Ash Wednesday and Easter Sunday. And that's what we're going to be exploring in Memento Mori. That's what we're going to be exploring as we go through, is not only our literal physical death and resurrection, but also all those other ways in which we need to die to self and live to Christ, die to sin and live to the Spirit. So it's about all of that stuff. So what does it mean for our particular Lent? It means, hey, just a reminder, Ash Wednesday is coming up here on February the 17th. So I'm recording this on February the 10th. It's 1 week from today, 7 p.m. You can not only attend in person, fully masked, socially distanced, but you can also connect via the live stream, and I hope you'll do that. Because we know so many people won't be there, and because we know that the imposition of ashes would involve a lot of physical touching and close proximity, we're doing something a little bit different this year. We're not going to impose ashes. Instead, we're going to hand out some things that people can take with them the whole 46 days. One of them is going to be a bracelet. Another one's going to be a little card that you could put on a bulletin board or put on, use a magnet, attach it to the fridge, whatever else, some things to remind us. Because often even the imposition of ashes, gosh, we wash that off, whether an hour later or a couple hours later, whatever. But we're going to give the congregation some things that you can take with you. And so if you're not in attendance, you could always pick one up at the office, or if you're not in attendance Ash Wednesday night, you can pick them up February 21st, the next Sunday. We'll have them around. So that's one of the things we're going to do. Another thing, there's a further explanation of Lent and all the Sundays that we're going to have that's in a document that you can link to, that's coming out in the email. It's accompanying. Link to that document is accompanying this video in the email that you should have received. So you can check that out. There will also be a link in that email where you can submit some of your own stories. We want to gather some stories from people's past of things they've had to die to and then live to. So I hope that you'll engage that. We want to find some stories, and when we're not sure exactly what we'll do with those stories, some of them could be recorded, but some of them will be real simple ways that we might use in worship, maybe even in an anonymous way, about some way that somebody died to something, lived to something, somebody else died to something, lived to something, somebody else died. We want to gather the stories of what dying to something and living to something looks like in your life. So check that link out. And then a couple other resources that I want to offer up to you as you think about this theme. One is that I want to commend a book called Remember Your Death. It's a Lenten devotional. It's actually written by a Catholic nun. So there's some really Catholic things in it, like praying the Rosary and praying the Hail Marys. But if you can get past some of that stuff, the rest of it is just really good content that could help you engage Lent, engage specifically the focus that we're having, this Remember Your Death kind of idea. And so there will be a link to that in the email as well. And then I'm actually going to run a little book group, a book study. That it's not about a book study, it's actually about embracing our mortality, but we're going to use this book as a way of getting us into it, called The End of the Christian Life. It's written by a professor at Western Seminary named J. Todd Billings, who has been diagnosed with a terminal cancer. He's already sort of outlived his prognosis, but is on daily chemo treatments, this like really gentle chemo that's sort of keeping him alive, but he's going to die a premature death well before his 70s or 80s, and he's done a ton of reflection about death and written a great book called The End of the Christian Life. And I'm going to lead a Tuesday Zoom class at noon for anybody who wants to participate in that. I don't want to take anything away from any other group that you're a part of, any Bible study or anything like that, but I think there's some other people out there who aren't plugged into something that would really love to journey through Lent. So that first Tuesday, February 23rd in Lent, we're going to engage this, and so there will be a little sign up form in the link in there, and you can check it out. And Todd Billings also prepared a Lenten sort of study guide to go with it, because it's conveniently has 7 chapters for these 7 weeks of Lent. So so come along the ride with me with that if you'd like to. We're going to think about death and whether or not it's a gift or a curse, and how all that works and what it means to embrace our mortality so that we can truly live into who God would have us be. And then the only other last thing that I want to say is we're going to use the daily prayer prompt that we used before in the Lord's Prayer sermon series, used a little bit in the Psalm series. We're going to use that to distribute a bunch of things as we go through Lent. That's all I've got for you. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this provided some orientation. And again, follow those links in the email and they'll provide even more orientation as we engage Lent 2000.